Hello, Croeso Fulcher. Welcome back to the channel. Old boy here. Another impromptu last-minute live. So my edit for the other video has just, I've way underestimated it, but I'm more than halfway through it, so it's coming up. And I just thought I'd do a quick live because I was just sent this really interesting article today about a shrine that's been uncovered in Rome. And one of the things that made me actually make the video is because I've obviously been writing this book about the Veneti, the Adriatic Veneti as well. And there's quite a lot of overlap actually with quite a lot of the items they've found. So this sort of shrine they've uncovered, it was actually built on top of an older votive site. And they've uncovered certain things like votives of body parts and things like that. And this is also what's found in the early Veneti culture as well. Because the Veneti culture and the Italic culture as well, they ultimately come from what the archaeologists term urnfield culture. And there's obviously different branches of it. So the Veneti then goes into an Este culture. It's basically just how the archaeologists name a certain time period and a certain archaeological context. So you have these different groups, but they ultimately branched off from what's called the urnfield culture, which was characterized by these things called Brandhofplätze, which are massive areas where remains were burned. So remains, votive offerings and things, and then the burial was deposited, the ashes were deposited into an urn. And this is characteristic of urnfield culture. So what I thought I would do is I'm going to read out the news article first because it does a good job of just summarizing everything. Then what I've done is I've gone on to the actual report from the Italian Office of Culture. I've translated some key excerpts from there so I can present those, tell you exactly what's being found. And then what I want to do is just do a bit of a comparison between some of the Veneti cultures and information that I found, and then just break down this transition from the urnfield culture, and then how the separate cultures then evolve. However, there is still some continuity followed through. So let's get into our news article. Let me make it bigger. Now I'm going to go on it myself. Right, so a mysterious shrine used by ancient Roman cultists has been found alongside a pair of elite tombs plundered after burial. And what's interesting is one of these burials, they found a skull, and it looks like they've actually performed some surgery on this skull as well. So I know you guys like that kind of thing, so I thought I would just include it. So the major dig also revealed an ancient skull with signs of advanced surgery and two enormous water tanks that were left abandoned. And these water tanks were very interesting to me as well, because in Este, which is in Veneti territory, Veneto territory, they've also found some similar things as well. So water shrines and votive deposits in water as well. So as soon as I saw this, it definitely piqued my interest. So look, here's the a picture of the shrine here, and it's obviously dated to the Roman Republic period as well, so like 4th and 3rd century BC, I believe. Here's inside, so they found a sarcophagus with urns as well. And here's what they've got to say. Archaeologists were excavating a site near Via Pietralata in the northeast part of Rome, and it's a preventative dig as well, so it wasn't a case of they were going in there to look for something. It was preventative archaeology that they were doing here for Italy's Ministry of Culture. So what they were doing is, before they're constructing things, the new buildings, that they get this archaeology to take place to make sure that nothing's going to get destroyed or disrupted as part of the modern construction. And they uncovered a treasure trove of ancient history dating back to the Roman Republic, which ran from 509 to 27 BC and ultimately transitioned into the Roman Empire. Archaeologists also uncovered a mysterious cult room at the site, which would have served as a sacellum or shrine. The room measured around 15 by 18 foot, with a square base coated in white plaster in the centre. This is believed to have been part of an altar. They also discovered a projection at the back wall of this room, which likely would have held a cult statue. The shrine was built over a site previously used for making religious offerings. So this again is what kind of piqued my interest here, because it's very similar, or it shows continuity with early culture, the practices of which can also be found in the practices of the Veneti as well. It's likely that the room was used by members of the cult of Hercules, according to archaeologists. That's because I believe they found a Hercules bronze votive. Although Hercules is a Greek god, Heracles, he was adopted by the ancient Romans as a hero. The cult of Hercules is believed to have reached Rome as early as the 6th century BC. So here's the main room. So this is what they were talking about here. So it looks like there was a shrine here in the center. And you'll notice there's niches in the corners as well, which is also in the water tanks as well. So here's one of the relics that was discovered of body parts. I believe they found other body parts as well. We'll get into that in a moment. And this is very similar to the water sanctuary at Este, which was a healing sanctuary. So what they would do is they would go in there, and wherever they had the affliction on their body, they would deposit these votive offerings depicting that body part. As well as that, archaeologists also found a burial site with 2 chamber tombs that date back to the Roman Republic. The first tomb dates back to between the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. Experts discovered a large sarcophagus, 3 urns, and several artifacts, including a cup, jug, and mirror. The second tomb dates back to the 3rd century BC and included the skull of an adult male. So here's a bit of a wider look at the funerary complex there. This grisly find shows signs of surgical trepanation, which is when a hole was deliberately created in the skull as a way of treating various ailments. It would have been an advanced kind of medicine at the time. Archaeologists believe that both tombs belonged to wealthy elites and had been plundered after burial. Another strange discovery was the uncovering of 2 very large cisterns, which were built in the 2nd century BC. So these are the water tanks. Just zoom in there. But, you know, there's access to them. They have little recesses and niches, so that they're not 100% certain, but they believe it may have been part of the cult or ritual practice rather. And what's interesting to me is, you know, you've got signs of cult, you've got signs of healing as well. And obviously back in those days, you can't really separate the cult and the healing. So it seems like it has all the hallmarks of a potential very interesting cult and healing center. Archaeologists don't know exactly what the water tanks were used for, but they believe that they were abandoned by the 2nd century AD. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to show you some of these Veneti finds as well, because they were using water as kind of like a liminal place associated with healing, and obviously connections to the underworld, or to well, as a liminal place where connection with the unseen forces could interact between them. So what they were doing here with these liminal sites in other parts of the Italic region, even going back into the Bronze Age, there was deposits in natural places with water, so springs and things like that, or caves with springs in them. They would have deposits in there, and then, as I said, in Este, in Veneto territory, they were depositing them into these similar things to this as well. So I am wondering if it is connected to the cult in a nutshell. I went a roundabout way of saying that. I should have just encapsulated it for you. The discoveries surround an ancient road that would have once cut right across the sites. Experts were able to uncover 2 sections of the road, including part of it that had been cut directly into the bedrock. So it looks like it was originally cut down into the bedrock, and then later there's another construction technique that's then added onto the top. And we'll go into that when we look at the quotes from the Ministry of Culture. So that looks like that's the end of the article there. So let me get this off screen now. And what I'm going to do is, let me just remove this. It's been a while since I've been on StreamYard, so I'm a little bit slow today. So I'm just going to quickly show you one of the votives, one of the other votives that found, because it's actually very similar in style to the Veneti votives, which is interesting. So look, this is one of the Hercules votives. And when I show you, in fact, I'll show you right now, actually, so you've got a good comparison. So take a look at this. This is the Hercules votive. And now have a look at this Veneto, this Veneti. So let me remove this. And let me share this. Yeah, and I wish I could get my glutes like that. Right, share screen, and then I'm on to my window. So, right. So this is actually my book. It's not the finished title, but or the finished version. It still needs checking and everything. But look, so this is where I'm looking at the Bronze Age here. So the ritual landscapes and religious evolution in northeastern Italian prehistory. So I'll go through the early Bronze Age, but we're going to want to focus more towards the end. But what I do want to show you here, just from the middle Bronze Age, as well as sun discs, because it seems to me that this Urnfield culture, there was sun worship was central. The fire, the ritual of fire in the cremation as well is a big shift from burials that took place beforehand, big monumental burials. It then shifts into the burning of the body and the ashes being deposited into an urn and buried. And at the same time, this sun worship appears. And when you look at texts like the Chaldean oracles, for example, say that one of the purest deaths is through fire. And I'm wondering if this has something to do with it, because amber is a massive thing that's found in this period of time, and it does seem to have been used in funerary contexts as well. And amber, electron, that comes from the same root as elector and electris, and elector is an epithet of the sun, Helios elector, and electris is an epithet of Selene, the moon. It's basically the feminine counterpart of elector. And the word for amber, electron, seems to come from a similar root. I mean, Beeks, he argues that he thinks it's from a different root. However, he believes by that period of time, when we're looking at the Greek literature, there's a connection in their minds between the two. So they definitely had an association, even if he thinks that electron may have been a loan word. So there's definitely a semantic connection. But that was a big tangent. Sorry about that. But anyway, alongside this, look, here's a big basin that was found, similar to the ones we're looking at. Obviously, this is much, much earlier. So this is from the Middle Bronze Age. So you're looking at 1,700 to 1,350 BC. So we're a long way back. But the whole point is there is some continuity that is preserved through these different layers. So that's why I wanted to show you that. And have a look at some of these votives. This is a Brandhof-Platze, where they would burn the bodies and things and certain offerings before putting them into the urn. And let me find some of these offerings. So these are from Veneto territory. So quite crude metal at this period. But once again, if I stop sharing this and go back to our Hercules votive, you can see it's in a similar style, like a crude metalworking style at that period. So I just thought that was worth pointing out as well. So let me just get back to this, and I'm just going to read out now some of the, let's remove this. Is that big on? Yeah, I must be big, yeah. Forget that. Right, let me find some of the notes. So the key things that were found, this new site, is as a long road axis running diagonally. So it's not oriented north, south, east, and west. It's running through one of the, I think it's northwest to southeast. There's a small shrine or a sacellum, which is a minor cult building. 2 Republican chamber tombs, 2 monumental basins, and this period, it was utilized from between the 4th and 5th centuries BC. However, there was it was built on top of an earlier votive site, and there was sporadic use afterwards as well. But I don't think that they think it was specifically connected to this period of time. So it's a coherent ritual landscape, basically, what we're looking at. It's not just an isolated find. So I'm just going to quote some key passages from the translation from the press release that was given by the Italian government. So what they said on what was found: 2 large, this is a quote, direct quote, 2 large monumental basins, a small cult building, probably dedicated to Hercules, and 2 Republican period tombs have emerged during preventative archaeological excavations carried out at the Parco della Accasi in Pietralata, in the eastern area of Rome. So it's there's signs of cult, there's signs of burial, you have controlled means of controlling and containing water, and also a road which facilitates movement. So duration of the use, this is what they had to say on that quote. The investigations have revealed occupation from the 5th to 4th century BC and also through to the 1st century AD, but this was more sporadic use during the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So it falls out of use as it comes out of the 1st century AD and into the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So there's long-term continuity here as well. It's not just a short-lived place. And again, built on top of that older site, it's got all of the hallmarks of some of the of continuity. So the sacellum and the votive deposits. The sacellum was constructed above a disused votive deposit, within which were found terracotta heads, feet, female figurines, and bovine figures. So it's interesting that they chose to build the shrine directly over one of these votive deposits. And when you hear of these body part votives, you're immediately thinking of healing practice as well, as I mentioned earlier. So this is another quote here. On the basis of these finds and its location along the Via Tibertina, the shrine has been tentatively connected to the cult of Hercules. And the key word here is tentative. So they've only got at the moment the archaeological evidence to work with. And I'm guessing that this votive of Hercules that's been found has obviously added to this tentative connection. But don't be surprised if any more information comes out later and it flips on its head. So the information keeps changing the more that they work. So with regards to the funerary context and status, this is what they had to say. The scale and monumentality of the tombs suggest they belonged to a wealthy gens, so a wealthy clan or family, and typically sometimes they would even own the land in which they were getting buried in as well. So they would own that land, and the ancestors and the extended clan would be buried there. So it's elite organized activity, essentially. Now, with regards to the medical practice, this is what they had to say. Among the burials was an adult male of whom only part of the skull has so far been recovered, on which there are signs of surgical trepanation, which has been recognized. So this is a deliberate surgical procedure to relieve, various ailments. But the takeaway points are it's not an accidental injury. It requires anatomical knowledge and the correct tools, and also a control technique as well. So it's interesting that we have evidence of some actual trepanation there with the skull. I'm sure that the medical people are going to be fascinated with that. And in many cases as well, in previous examples, they've actually found evidence that it's been successful with certain regrowth of the bone as well. And with everything else that we found here, the context, it's definitely shouting that it's potentially strong evidence towards a healing cult. So very interesting there for me. Now, with regards to the monumental basins, this is what they said. The precise function of the monumental basins remains uncertain, though associated materials and architectural features suggest a possible ritual use rather than purely practical water management. So there's controlled access, there's different niches in there, ramps, And alongside these other votives, and particularly the body parts, it's you can see why they're thinking healing cult center, because, as I said, in the wider context, in Veneto territory, you have very, very similar sites. Okay, so now I'm just going to give you a bit of a timeline of how the cultures evolve over time in Italy in general. So as I said, the Urnfield culture, that comes around 1300 BC, and that persists until around 800 BC. As I mentioned earlier, it's associated with cremation burials where the ashes are placed in urns, and these Brandhofplätze, which are these large spaces where they find human remains and other associated finds, such as funerary offerings and votives and things like that. So it's a ritual landscape tied to fire and ancestor veneration. Then after that, we move into the late Bronze Age transition period. So this is around 700 to 800 BC. And this is the period of time with regards to the Veneti culture. They go into what's called the Este culture, which again is just a certain branch as it moves away from Urnfield. And it's where they start getting their own identifiable culture, basically. It starts branching off, but they do still keep this continuity going as they diverge. So in this period, this is where we see Urnfield traditions regionalize. They don't disappear, they just regionalize. So cremation continues in this period, but votive offerings increase and ritual spaces become structured, because earlier on in the early periods, they would just have boundary markers. And then this would then evolve in the earliest forms. They would have they found evidence of basically wooden buildings. And then as it advances, they then start becoming more structuralized. So they were certainly more integrated into the landscape in the early periods. So you're looking at groves, for example, with boundary markers, or caves, or other liminal areas, springs and such, or even mountain areas as well. So they were very integrated into the landscape. Then as that advances, they seem to then I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. They seem to then give the boundaries no longer are totally intertwined with nature. It starts becoming more officiated and more structuralized. So in this late Bronze Age transitional period, the Italy, the Alps and the Adriatic, they remain more culturally coherent before we move into the next phase. So the Proto-Italic and Proto-Venetic phase, and this occurs around 1000 to 700 BC. So this is where linguistic groups begin to form and religious practices. They remain similar, there's some coherence there, but also we start getting slightly different practices. But certainly by this period, we're getting signs of water cults, votive limbs, which I've mentioned earlier in Este, and also ancestor rites as well. So ancestor veneration seems to have been a huge thing. So another group of things that they find in the archaeology is weapons and armor, but armor that looks as though it's been placed on top of a wooden model, almost like an idol, essentially. So that's interesting as well. So within this Proto-Italic and Proto-Venetic group period, as I said, this is where they start linguistically diverging from one another. The later differences that we see grew out of this shared base, but this is the period where it starts diverting. So the Pietralata in context here, which is from the 4th to 2nd century BC. So we see instances of the sacellum being built over an earlier votive deposit. We find the monumental basins, which are built in what's called an opus incertum, which is a kind of Roman masonry where they use irregular stones set into concrete. And what we're seeing here, this is continuity from the earlier periods. This isn't just particularly what we would call a Roman invention. This is a sign of continuity here. Now, the medical cult and healing practices. So with the votive limbs, the trepanation, the water and animal votives, because the animal votives are massive as well for the Veneti. And let's now actually look at some of those comparisons, to be fair, because I think this is where it's going to illustrate it the best. So Pietralata, we've got finds of these heads, feet and limbs in terracotta, and in Este, which is in the Venetic sanctuaries, we also find hands, feet, legs and heads. Sometimes they're deposited in water or by water. Some of them were made out of metal as well, very thin metal. They also found female figurines as well at Pietralata. Now this is terracotta, but over in Este we find votives of women, and they're usually holding libations, and they've been associated with certain either female rituals relating to fertility and also generalized fertility rites. But what they're symbolizing is actually the person taking part in the rite themselves. And they also found votives in Veneto territory of horses and such as well. And here on the flip side, there's bull offerings, so bovine. So as you can see, there's a lot of similarities here, but I just wanted to highlight it's just because it grows out of an earlier shared culture that then adapts over time, and also you've got influxes of other people, which causes cultural mixing as well, and then they go off onto the their own different tangents. So let me just have a quick look at the chat here, see who's on. Hey Valerie, great to see you, and Banner as well, great to see you, matey. Thank you for joining. Let's see if there's some questions here. Hey Tammy, great to see you. So Darko Alias says here, I ran across a book written in Latin which depicted large tanks of water with what I think were pregnant women in it. I cannot remember the name of the book at the moment. That's very interesting, mate. I would love to take a look if you do remember the name of it. And very interesting that it was related to childbirth there as well, because one of the deities that the Veneti worshipped is called Rhaetia, and she's also associated with water and childbirth, but also with writing as well. She may have been a goddess of writing, because a lot of the votives that were deposited to her in these contexts, they're kind of like alphabets, and they're kind of a tablet like this, which has the alphabet, but then it also has short phrases and things written on it, and I think they were actually there to help learn the language also. So she could have been associated with childbirth too. So I'm just saying, with the water connection to childbirth, and then there's more tanks here that you say were connected to images of pregnant women. That's very interesting, and I do think that there is a potential connection there. Sound very Zoroastrian. I'm guessing you're talking there. So this is Jean. Sounds very Zoroastrian. So are you referring there to the principles of fire? Because yeah, the Zoroastrian they did worship the fire as well, and there is allusions to that in some of the texts, such as the Chaldean oracles and things. So that they'll sometimes refer to Zoroaster in some of the texts also. And I guess it's almost like the Vestal virgins as well, keeping the fires running, or the Greek counterpart is Hestia. And it's very interesting because that's come up in a lot of the cult texts as well. And the language that the Orphic hymns, for example, are using, they're using the same language, or rather people such as Pythagoras, or the Pythagoreans are using the similar language when discussing how the universe works as well. So it's very interesting because the Orphics, they're using metaphor. For example, I believe that one of the Orphic texts, when it's talking about Zeus swallowing Phanes, it's describing the same thing as the tetractys, because Phanes is obviously the number 10, and the tetractys is the totality of all things. One had 2, had 3, had 4 equals 10, but 10 is just 1 once again. And that is, where, this whole numerology thing of my birthday, my date of birth's 1986, so you had 1, 9, 8, and 6 up, and then you add all those numbers together. And for a long time, I was like, where's that come from? That just sounds, I don't know, just somebody's invented it recently. But actually, when you look in the Pythagorean texts, they actually describe doing that. They followed that procedure, and it's outlined in the Tetractys. So just thought I'd mention that there. Right, so amber was so popular that people named themselves after it. This is Carl Karsnark. I didn't know that the people in the Germanic world would name themselves after it, but I can see why, considering that, it was all coming from the Baltic. It would have all passed through Germanic lands as well. So, yeah, I can see why they would hold it, quite dear there. Banner, thank you very much for the super chat there. I really appreciate it. Amber, electric, it's where the word, so electron, the word for amber, it's where the word electric and electricity comes from. And it was due to them, so they knew that it had a static charge, that if you rubbed it, small things like lint would be attracted to it. So, yeah, there's been a connection with electricity for a long time. So I'm pleased you brought that up, actually. And thank you very much. That's you're too kind. I really do appreciate it. Very kind of you. Yes, Carl says Hercules. Figurines have been found all over Central Europe too. Yeah, it seems to be very widespread. So most amber comes from Northern Europe. Yeah, it does. This is Joe Dalton. Where did the Greek myths come from? Well, the Eridanus is mentioned in there, which may have been one of the rivers leading into or the Po. Later authors describe it as the Po. But they seem to have, regardless of which river it was, there certainly was a river that was associated with amber, because they were bringing it down through the Vistula and everything, and it reached the Adriatic. So the Adriatic was the way that amber actually reached the Mediterranean. And in my book, I've found information where in some of these stories, some of the people mentioned in these mythologies, some of the islands associated with the trade network have these names as well. So as I said on my short the other day, this is why I think the trade network is heavily involved in the spread of the cult, potentially. And also some of the texts even mention certain areas that were key areas in the trade network. One of them even mentions Hibernia, which is Ireland, and then from there the sail past Tartessus, which is also, that is in Iberia, and that was another key area of the trade network. So it's interesting that this is all filtering into some of the cult texts as well. Yeah, Carl's right here. The Greeks and Germanics have always been traders and sailors with very extensive connections. Yeah, if anything, the Vikings were late to the party. They were just continuing a tradition that had gone on since the Bronze Age, with these traders, even going overland, portaging over certain periods between rivers and things like that. And I think it's always been going on, put it that way. And even the people who were carrying out the trade, the scholars out there who think that they did indeed embed themselves into certain cultures, such as the Germanic people. And this is why I think you find certain words that all come from the same linguistic root. So, for example, Osir, I know we've talked about this before. There's no concrete etymology connecting it to the Etruscan Isa, but the Veneti, it's Isun. They worship the Isun, which means gods. And that has an etymology with the Celtic god Essus, who is inscribed in one inscription as Isun as well. So it all shares a linguistic root. So the Celtic people also had a god with this linguistic root. And again, the word tutor, as in Tua de Danann, that word Tua, and the word Teuton, which essentially means group or tribe. And the Veneti also have this word tutor, and it's written on votives and boundaries as you're going into precincts, you know, saying this boundary is for the tutor, for the people or tribe. So, but at the same time, the languages are different. So you're potentially looking at an intermediary who has a word, and then other languages are borrowing that word, and then it adapts into their own respective languages. And what's really interesting, Carl mentions Hyperborea here as well. I've got a lot on Hyperborea, and in fact, one of the rites that the Hyperboreans perform, I found a parallel of it in one of the cult texts as well. And I don't want to give it away because I just want to get the book out there, but I will be making videos on it all as well. Yep. So Jean says here you also have Hittite and Akkadian influence on Greek and Egyptians too. Yep. So you see very similar motifs coming through that aren't just Indo-European. For example, the notion of the sun being the eye of Zeus, or Hercules, or being the eye of Ra, for example. This is an Indo-European motif of the sun being representative of an eye of the male god, and then the moon being the eye of the female god. So Apollo and Artemis. And there are texts that Macrobius talks about it. He says it was specifically called the Eye of Jove as well. So, and that is in the Egyptian. So you're there going, okay, so it is prevalent in Indo-European, but it's also prevalent in the Egyptian side as well. So I guess it's a case of where does that actually originate? So this is just one of many connections here that you have to factor in. And obviously the Hittites, the notion of Typhon, you know, that whole story seems to be encapsulated in one of the Hittite steles as well, which I've done a video on before. Yeah, Joe says the Dorians came from the north. How far north were they? Yeah, because now this is one thing that I'm coming up across as well. So the notion of the Dorian invasion is now quite contested. However, with these new burial practices, these urnfield practices cropping up, what's interesting when you read the post-Homerica, so for example, when they're giving a goodbye to Ajax, for example, he's burnt on a pyre, which isn't typical. It looks more coherent with this kind of practice we're talking about, this urnfield practice, and they throw amber on the fire as well. So they're using the amber in the funerary context. And I mean, the Egyptians were doing that as well. So it's not just isolated to the Mediterranean, but it's just interesting because, like you mentioned, the Dorians, because there is something going on there, but I haven't quite got to the bottom of it yet. Hey, GSMMW, how you doing? Great. Thanks for joining. Yes, Amber says, is that Apollo behind you? So yeah, I found a bust of Apollo. You know what? I found it in a local, kind of like an antique shop, and it was just out front, and it was just going to waste. And I thought, I need to save it. Elithwea, yes, the goddess of childbirth. So this is Marian Hyatt has just mentioned that. Yes, there does seem to be certain parallels with Rhaetia, the Venetic goddess as well. So I'm going to write about that. I'm going to go into that in a future video. But yes, you've picked up on something there. Fats Rabbits, great to see you. Thanks for the salute. Tina, thanks for joining. Thank you, Ashes, Beautiful Ashes. I really appreciate it. Yeah, Carl says Tartessus is so cool. Yeah, it is. Definitely check out that region of Iberia. There's lots of stuff there. They've even got lots of kind of like nuclear, and I mean like as in nucleus, buildings where they're all like interconnected rings and everything. Lots of stone buildings going back into the Bronze Age. But you know what's interesting is the same beaker phenomena that later that goes into Britain and the British Isles in the Bronze Age, you know, it was quite prevalent in Iberia as well. So super interesting. Yeah, so Jason and the Argonauts, Carl says, he have to portage their ship for a large distance in the Libyan desert. Yeah, so if it's the Orphic Argonautica I was talking about before. They describe, they're basically going on a part of the trade route. So they go through the rivers, they come out of the North Sea, they come past the British Isles, and then past Tartessos and back into the Mediterranean. So, you know, it's all connected, really. And I mean, even Colchis was an early a place where they were getting these metals from in an early period. And ancestor veneration, as I said, is massive, because these kings, you know, they found shrines dedicated to Agamemnon's Zeus. So these kings were taking the title of Zeus early on. And it seems to me like, just as Zeus is described as the orderer of the universe and the cosmos, they were like the earthly embodiment of that and the earthly representation of that, the person who, you know, gives order to their realm or their rulership, essentially, which is why they were adopting these titles, Agamemnon's Zeus, for example. And that is quite explicit when you read the Orphic Argonautica. So when Aeetes is presented, you know, he's presented as a god. He's described as a god shining like the sun, because he's in all this bronze or gold, you know, and he's shining like the sun. And you can see that they're describing him as a god, essentially. But again, you know, this is where your ancestor veneration's going to be coming from. The Voynich manuscript. Thank you, Darko Alias. He says this is what the script is. So I'm gonna save that and I'm gonna check it out. Thank you very much for. I can show these. I forgot. So there you go, everybody. If you wanted to get that down and check it out, I keep forgetting I can do that. Joe Dalton, thank you very much. Thanks for that super chat there. Really appreciate it. And yeah, the river systems were, you know, being heavily utilized. So you're talking the tin was coming from the British Isles and some of the islands off the coast of Iberia as well. They were then using the riverine systems, so the Loire and the Rhine and things, to then get to places like Massalia. So these rivers that were in Iberia and France were going to the Western Mediterranean, Massalia and things like that. And then the amber was coming from the Baltic, going through the Vistula. It was coming over through the Alps and then reaching the Adriatic. But there was quite a few ports all going round there. But yeah, the riverine systems were heavily being used. And after they've done this recent study on Cornish tin, that's now prompted them to start looking at some of these cities on some of the major river routes as well, to see what they can uncover with regards to trade. Yeah, Thrace. So Carl says the ancient writers mention them, but then the Dorians, but they never say where they were from exactly. Maybe Thrace or Bulgaria. Yeah, and this keeps coming up a lot, you know, because there's a group of people who were called the Briges, and they're in this central kind of region, and Herodotus says they migrated east, you know, eventually reaching Asia Minor, where they then become the Phrygians. So he talks about a group migrating out of then. You know, one wonders if they're connected to this wider sort of later diaspora. Yeah, they all knew about the Danube too. Yeah, they did. That was one of the main rivers that they were utilizing to, you know, the Greeks later call it the Ister, I believe, but it's been used for a very long time, and they could portage over the high points to then get into riverine routes that then take them further into the North Sea as well. Oh, thank you. Ashes Beautiful Ashes says, your accent is perfect for documentaries. Thank you very much. I always worry about it because I panic people can't understand it, because it's not like a typical British or English accent, really. So I'm just going to have a look. Face tattoos, one of the trashiest and black-coded things imaginable. Nothing wrong with them, mate. You know, those. It's a practice that's been going on since Otzi the Iceman, and linguistically, one of the authors, he describes the Thracians as eugenes because they were tattooed, which is where they. I mean, it means genes means to be bred, eu means well, so it distinguished them as nobles. And also the Celts, there's coins, Celtic coins with face tattoos as well. So, hey, there we go. Bit of. I'm going to do a video on it actually, the history of tattoos. So that's another thing that I'm going to do, going all the way back to Otzi, and then going all the way through the Thracians, the Scythians, and potentially the Britons as well. So, hey. Oh, here's a good one actually from Carl. Herodotus has been proven almost entirely correct on the Scythian material culture and practices. There were even Scythian police in Athens itself. Yeah, they were hired, weren't they, as archers to look after Athens. But it's interesting you say that, because what Herodotus wrote about the Etruscans coming from Lydia, when they looked at the genetics, the Etruscan samples were clustering with a region in Asia Minor that was close to Lydia as well. So it is interesting because he could have been right about that as well, from what the genetics say. Thank you, Darko Alias. I really appreciate that. Anyways, right. Let me have a look. I'm just having a look, see if there's any more before I go. Thanks for tuning in, Valerie. I really appreciate it. You know, you're always there. So thanks for the support so much. Thanks everyone for the super chats as well. You know, it's a big help. It really helps. I'm just going to clear up these last couple of comments first. So, yep, I'm going to leave it there, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that. And I just wanted to show some of the info as well from the book as well. So, hey, Amon, thanks for joining. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And it'll be good to catch up at some point as well. I'll get in touch about the Greek. Hey, take care, everyone, and have a good night.